My name is Daniel. I'm 30, and until last year, I honestly thought my family was just normal messed up, you know? The kind of family that argues during holidays, but still shows up when something serious happens. But on the day everything blew up, I realized they weren't just messy. They were hiding things from me for years, and I only figured it out because of my grandmother's inheritance, something I didn't even know she meant to leave specifically to me. That day started like any other. I woke up in my apartment around 9, made coffee, and checked my phone, and right there was a voicemail from my aunt saying she needed to talk urgently. The kind of voice you hear and immediately know something died or someone did something stupid. I called her back, and she told me Grandma's lawyer wanted to meet with me privately. I didn't understand why privately, because I wasn't even expecting anything. My grandmother wasn't rich, but she was careful with money. She saved everything, reused foil, washed Ziplocs. I thought maybe she left me some sentimental thing like her recipe box or her old camera. So I drove to the lawyer's office assuming it was going to be something small and emotional. I swear, I wasn't prepared for what I heard, and I definitely wasn't prepared for what came after, especially when I realized the inheritance had basically vanished before I even learned it existed. The lawyer, this older guy named Harris who talked like he was always running out of patience, sat me down and told me my grandmother had left me her savings account, her small house upstate, and a CD she'd been renewing for almost 20 years. I remember blinking at him because it didn't make sense. My grandma never talked about having that kind of money. And then he slid a printed document toward me, already notarized, already signed months before she got sick. My name was right there in writing. She wanted it all to go to me. And for a second, I felt this weird mix of confusion and guilt because I grew up thinking she didn't really see me as the responsible one. Then Harris looked uncomfortable, which made me uncomfortable, and that's when he said, "There's a problem." Turns out when they pulled the account records to prepare everything, most of the money was already gone. The house had been transferred out of her name months before she passed, and the CD had been cashed out the same week she was hospitalized. I just stared at him, completely frozen, because he was saying it like this was just paperwork stuff, but it was my grandmother's entire life savings. He said the transfers were authorized, meaning someone used her documents while she was still alive. And the only people who had access to her things were my parents. I walked out of that office feeling like the floor wasn't solid. I sat in my car for maybe 15 minutes, just replaying every interaction I'd had with my parents during the months my grandma was in and out of the hospital. I remembered my dad insisting he would handle her paperwork because I was too busy with work to deal with it. I remembered my mom always guarding her purse whenever my grandma asked for her wallet or wanted to check her mail. It all felt off at the time, but I pushed it aside because you don't automatically assume your own parents are stealing from your dying grandmother. I drove straight to their house because I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't ask them directly. And when I got there, my mom opened the door acting like everything was normal. I didn't even sit down. I asked where grandma's money went, and I swear the way her face changed made my stomach drop. It wasn't confusion. It was panic. My dad came out a second later, and he didn't even bother pretending. He just said, "We did what we had to do," like that was supposed to make sense. He said Grandma didn't need the money anymore, and that family resources should benefit everyone, not just one person. I didn't even react at first. I felt like someone had unplugged something inside my head. They tried to justify it like they were some kind of heroes saving the family from financial collapse. They said they used part of the money to stabilize the house, which basically meant paying off their credit cards and finally fixing the roof they'd ignored for a decade. They said the rest was invested, but when I asked in what, my mom literally couldn't answer. My dad told me not to make a scene, which was funny because I hadn't even raised my voice yet. I just kept repeating the same question. Why was everything transferred before Grandma even passed? And they kept dodging, acting like I was being dramatic. The part that really messed me up wasn't even the money. It was realizing they didn't see anything wrong with what they did. They genuinely believed they had the right to take everything because it should stay in the family, except apparently I wasn't considered part of the family when it came to decisions. And the worst part? They didn't even apologize. They kept insisting Grandma would have wanted it this way, even though I had a signed legal document literally stating the opposite. I walked out before I could say something I'd regret, but honestly, they were the ones who should have been ashamed. I drove around aimlessly after that. I didn't want to go home, didn't want to call anyone, didn't want to think. I ended up parking in this grocery store lot where I used to wait for my grandma when she shopped on weekends. I just sat there thinking about how she would have reacted if she knew what they did. She trusted my parents. She let them handle everything because she thought they were responsible, and they used that trust to empty her life's work. I called the lawyer again from the car, told him everything, and he basically said the only way to challenge it was through a fraud investigation, which meant dragging my parents through legal hell. I don't even know if I have the emotional energy for that. But as I sat there, I remembered something. My grandma once told me she kept copies of every important paper in a folder under her bed because she didn't trust computers. If those copies still exist, maybe they show dates, signatures, something that proves she never authorized anything. The weird part is, when she died, that folder wasn't in her room anymore. I thought maybe the hospital misplaced things, but now I'm not so sure. Things feel too perfectly timed, almost like someone cleaned everything up before anyone could look. And that thought has been sitting in my head ever since, heavy in a way I can't shake. A couple of days after that meeting, I drove upstate to my grandma's old house, even though it technically wasn't hers anymore. The place was already half emptied out, like someone had rushed through it without caring what they tossed or kept. I walked into her bedroom and opened every drawer, every old tin box, even those plastic containers she used instead of real storage bins. Nothing. Not a single document. The folder she kept under her bed wasn't there either. The bed frame had been pushed aside a little, leaving marks like someone had dragged it out quickly. I don't know why, but standing there in that room made everything hit harder. I remembered how she used to fold her sweaters perfectly, how she'd scold me for sitting on her bed with outside pants. And now the whole place felt violated. I checked the closet, the bathroom cabinet, even that tiny drawer where she kept old receipts from the 90s. Someone had definitely wiped it clean. I sat on the edge of the bed and realized something I'd been trying not to admit. There was no way someone just lost the papers. Someone got rid of them on purpose. And considering only a handful of people even had a key to the house, I didn't need much imagination to figure out who. On my way back, I decided to stop at my aunt's place, the one who had called me that morning when everything started. She's always been the one person in the family who didn't treat me like a kid. When I walked in, she took one look at me and said I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I didn't even try to hide anything. I told her exactly what the lawyer said, what my parents admitted, everything I found missing at the house. And she just nodded slowly, like she wasn't surprised at all. That pissed me off more than anything. When someone you trust reacts calmly to news that should be shocking, it means they knew something already. She finally said, "I tried to warn your grandmother, but she didn't want to believe they'd do something like that. She told me she'd seen my parents handling grandma's checkbook months before she got really sick, and that whenever she brought it up, my mom would get defensive. My aunt didn't know the details, but she'd suspected something was off." Hearing that made the knot in my stomach tighten. It meant this wasn't some last-minute desperation move. This was planned, and it had been happening long before anyone realized Grandma wouldn't be around much longer. That night, I went home and sat in my kitchen with all the lights off. I kept thinking about the last decent conversation I'd had with my grandma, when she told me she was proud of me for building a life on my own. She'd said it so casually that I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it felt like she had been trying to tell me something without actually saying it. I wondered if she wrote anything down or told someone else. If she suspected the people closest to her were crossing a line. I pulled up my laptop and dug through old emails, texts, voicemails, anything she might have sent me. And weirdly, I found one message she had sent months before she passed. It was short. She asked if I still had the spare key she gave me years ago. I remember replying that I thought I did, but I never followed up. Now I couldn't find that key anywhere. Not in my drawers, not in that box of random stuff every apartment has. It was gone, just like everything else connected to her. I didn't sleep at all that night, and by morning I felt like I was living inside someone else's life, like this wasn't supposed to be happening to me. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house. This time I wasn't calm. I wasn't yelling, but I wasn't pretending things were okay either. My dad met me at the door like he had been waiting. He had that stiff posture he gets whenever he thinks he's about to deliver some fatherly wisdom, which honestly made me want to turn around and leave. But I pushed past him and went straight to the kitchen, where my mom was sitting with a pile of mail. I asked them directly where the documents were and who moved them from Grandma's house. My mom froze again, and my dad said, "Those papers weren't important anymore." Hearing that almost made me laugh because he said it like he was talking about old coupons, not legal documents tied to an inheritance. I told them the lawyer needed those papers, and that without them, it looked like fraud. My dad didn't deny anything. He just kept repeating that he won't let this family tear itself apart over money, which is hilarious because they literally tore it apart by taking it. The way they talked, it felt like they had already rewritten the whole story in their heads. Like I was the unreasonable one for caring. I left before the conversation turned into a full-blown fight. But right as I was pulling out of the driveway, my mom came running out with something in her hand. It was an envelope. She looked terrified, like giving it to me might destroy her. She didn't say anything, just pushed it through the car window. When I opened it later at home, there were 3 things inside. A photocopy of my grandma's signature, a handwritten note from my mom saying, "I'm sorry," and a bank slip dated 2 weeks before Grandma died. The slip showed a withdrawal, almost the entire savings. It wasn't in my parents' handwriting. It wasn't Grandma's either. And the signature didn't match the one on her old ID. It was close, but not the same. Seeing that made everything feel even heavier. Because if my mom was scared enough to hand me this in secret, it meant she knew something was way worse than we used the money. It meant someone forged something. Someone panicked enough to leave a trail. And I still don't know if she was trying to help me or cover herself before everything explodes. I called the lawyer again the next morning and told him about the envelope, the fake signature, everything. He got quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Daniel, forged documents are a whole different level." He told me to bring the slip in, but he also warned me that if I started an investigation, it wouldn't stay quiet. My parents could face charges, my mom especially, and the idea of being the one who pushed things that far made my stomach twist. I didn't want to destroy my family. I just wanted to understand what the hell happened. After I hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the envelope. The slip was starting to curl at the edges from how many times I'd handled it, and the signature looked more wrong every time I glanced at it. I kept wondering who actually signed it. Was it my dad? Someone at the bank helping them? Or someone they hired because they were too afraid to do it themselves? I felt like every answer just opened a bigger, darker question, and none of it made sense with the parents I thought I had. I didn't talk to my parents for a few days after that. I ignored their calls, their texts, everything. I needed space to breathe. During that time, I kept trying to piece together a timeline. When was the house transferred? When was the CD cashed? What day did the savings disappear? Every date pointed to one thing. All the money vanished before anyone knew Grandma wasn't going to recover. That's what messed me up the most. If they had done it after she passed, it would have still been horrible, but at least it wouldn't feel like they were waiting for her to die. But doing it before, it felt intentional in a way I didn't know how to process. I went back to Grandma's house one last time hoping I had missed something, anything. I walked around the empty rooms like some kind of ghost, opening drawers I had already checked, pulling books from shelves that were mostly empty. At one point, I found a tiny scrap of paper wedged behind a dresser. It was a grocery list in her handwriting. Nothing important. But for some reason, finding that stupid little list hit me harder than anything else. It was the only untouched thing left of hers. Everything else had been cleaned out like someone wanted her erased. 2 nights later, I finally picked up when my mom called again. She sounded exhausted and shaky, like she hadn't slept. She asked if we could meet somewhere neutral, so we chose this old diner near downtown where the waitresses still call everyone hun. When she walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered, like this whole thing had aged her overnight. She didn't even order anything. She just sat there with her hands in her lap and said she never wanted it to go this far. I asked her what this meant, but she didn't answer directly. Instead, she kept saying my dad got in too deep. Those were her exact words. I asked what that meant, and she flinched like she wasn't allowed to say. At that point, I wasn't angry anymore. I was scared, because my mom has always been nervous, but this was different. This felt like fear. She finally whispered that they used some of the money to pay off someone my dad owed. Someone who doesn't let things go. I asked who, but she shook her head again. That was the last straight answer I got from her. I left the diner feeling like I had stepped into a story that didn't belong to me. Something about the way she said, "someone who doesn't let things go," replayed over and over in my mind. I didn't want to believe my dad was involved with anything shady, but suddenly a lot of things made sense, like why he always got aggressive when money came up, why he'd disappear for hours claiming he was running errands, why my mom always seemed terrified of upsetting him. It hit me that maybe the inheritance wasn't stolen out of greed, but out of desperation. And that scared me more than if they had just been selfish. Because you can forgive selfish. Desperation tied to the wrong people, that's a whole different thing. I sat in my car outside the diner until my phone battery died, thinking about whether I should push this further. If I did, I could drag up things my mom couldn't handle, things my family might never recover from. But if I didn't, it meant letting them get away with robbing my grandmother while she was dying. It meant pretending none of this happened. I didn't know which choice was worse. The weirdest part happened the next day. I went to the lawyer's office with the envelope, ready to start whatever process I needed to. But when I got there, Harris wasn't in. His assistant said he had taken an unexpected leave and wouldn't be back for at least a week. She said it in a way that felt rehearsed, like she'd already explained it 100 times. I asked if he had called, emailed, anything. She said no, just didn't show up one morning. I don't know why, but something about that timing hit me wrong. The day after my mom hinted that my dad owed money to the wrong people, the lawyer who was supposed to help me suddenly vanished. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he had a family emergency. But standing there in that office, looking at his empty desk through the open door, I felt something sink in my chest. Like the ground beneath all of this had shifted again. I walked out without leaving the documents. I don't even know why. Something inside me just told me to hold on to them. And to this day, I don't know if that was paranoia or instinct. For the next few days, things got weird in a way I still don't fully understand. I noticed a car parked across from my building one night when I got home. It was this old. The next morning, I decided to check on my parents again, mostly because I needed to see with my own eyes if they were okay. When I pulled up, my dad's truck wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but my mom looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She kept wringing her hands and staring past me like she was expecting someone else to show up. I asked about the person my dad supposedly owed money to, but she shut down instantly, said she shouldn't have mentioned that. Before I could press her, my dad walked in from the backyard, and the moment he saw me, his whole expression hardened. He told me I needed to drop all of this. He didn't even phrase it like a request. It was an order. When I didn't respond, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the old beer on his breath, and he said, "You don't want to get involved in things you don't understand." Hearing my own father say that made my chest tighten, because it wasn't anger. It was warning, real warning. And for the first time, I realized maybe this wasn't about the money anymore. Maybe something bigger was happening behind all of this, something I never should have stumbled into in the first place. That afternoon, I went back to my place, and the car was gone. Completely gone. Not anywhere on the street. It felt like whoever had been sitting there decided they'd seen enough. Or maybe they realized I noticed them. I tried to go about my day like nothing was wrong, but everything felt off. My phone buzzed nonstop with unknown numbers calling. When I answered one, there was just breathing on the other end before the person hung up. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a wrong number. But when it happens 4 times in a row, you start thinking it's not coincidence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat awake on my couch with the envelope on the table in front of me like it was some kind of bomb. Around 3 in the morning, there was a knock on my door. Not loud, not frantic, just one single knock. I froze and didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After maybe a full minute, I checked the peephole, and there was no one there. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. Just silence. And for some reason, that scared me more than if someone had been standing there. The next day, I went back to the lawyer's office to see if Harris had returned, even though the assistant said he'd be gone for a week. But when I walked in, there was a different woman at the front desk. A completely different receptionist. I asked where the assistant was, and the woman said she'd never heard of someone by that name. I asked about Harris, and she said he was between firms and hadn't worked there for months. I stood there staring at her like she was speaking another language. I pulled out my phone to show her emails he had sent me, but the emails were gone. Not deleted, gone. Like they never existed. Same with the voicemail from my aunt telling me to go meet him that first day. All the calls from his number disappeared from my phone log too. I walked out of that building in a daze, feeling like the ground beneath this whole situation had split open again. I don't know if someone wiped the records, or if I'm losing my mind, or if Harris changed his number and the firm didn't want to get involved. But the timing was too perfect, too clean. And the weirdest part is that the envelope I had been carrying everywhere suddenly felt heavier, like it was the last physical proof of something I wasn't even sure how to describe anymore. That night, I sat in my living room again with all the lights off, holding the envelope and trying to figure out what to do next. I kept thinking about my grandma, about how she trusted the wrong people at the worst possible time, and how I might be doing the same thing by even trying to investigate this. Around midnight, I heard something outside my apartment door again, like a paper sliding across the floor. When I opened the door, there was nothing there. Nothing except a faint smell of cigarette smoke, the kind my dad used to bring home when I was a kid, even though he pretended he never smoked. I don't know if it was him. I don't know if it was someone else. I don't know if it was anything at all. But I do know that the next morning, when I went to look for the envelope, it was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. The table was clear, the drawer where I sometimes put it was empty, and my entire apartment was exactly the same except for that one missing thing. I still have no explanation for how it disappeared. And the worst part is, after it vanished, the phone call stopped. The car never showed up again. My parents stopped mentioning anything. Harris never resurfaced. Everything just went quiet. Completely quiet. And to this day, I can't explain any of it. It was like the whole thing got swallowed by something bigger than me. And whatever it was, decided it was over.